thank you so much for watching this video. It is October and interview season is approaching for medical school, residency, and fellowship. And so I hope this video is not too late, but I really wanted to make an updated interview tips type video. I made an interview tips video a couple years ago, which I will link below, which I still think is really good and has a ton of good tips and things that I would still agree with right now. But I thought that I would make an updated, kind of more in-depth, all of the interview tips that I can think about in terms of medical school, residency, or fellowship interviews. Also, I love all the conversation that we're able to have down in the comments below, and so I would love any of your advice, your tips, anything that you can share for fellow applicants. So please comment below so that everybody else can get some good tips. If you have any suggestions or anything that you've learned as you've gone through the interview process, then definitely share that with everybody. So for the format of this video, I'm going to start with kind of pre-interview prep, night before interview, day of interview, and kind of go through it sequentially. And I hope that you're able to get a bunch of good tips and learn some things along the way. Starting with pre-interviews, I think these days, especially when you're in medical school and you're getting interview invites for residency, it's super overwhelming because you're getting tons of interviews, offers that are all coming in at the same time, and the slots for interviews fill up so fast. At least for ophthalmology, I know that you have to respond within an hour or else the spot is going to fill up. And so there are a ton of different tips about notifications that you can have on your phone or Google calendars or different ways that you can try to stay on top of this and make sure that you are able to get the interview spots that you want. I'm going to share a podcast below that is specifically for ophthalmology residents that I listened to that I thought had some really good tips, because this wasn't quite as big of an issue when I was going through the application process, but I think that trying to have your dates organized and know what interview date you want and being able to respond quickly is very valuable. Because I know, for example, for me, there was a date in December where there were 4 different programs that all had interviews that day, and I had invites to all 4 of them, and I could obviously only choose one. And so you're gonna have to be making tough decisions, tough scheduling decisions in terms of getting flights, canceling flights, booking hotels, figuring out your travel. It's a very stressful and chaotic time. So I would definitely recommend having some kind of system, whether that means going through all of the interview dates from the year before and trying to map out when programs have their interviews, because generally programs keep their interview dates at similar times, or keeping a Google Calendar, or keeping different alert type systems, whatever it is that works for you. And I don't have any good personal tips for this because it wasn't as much of an issue when I was applying and going through residency interviews, but it's definitely a thing today, and I don't know how much of an issue it is outside of ophthalmology, but I'm sure it's the same across many specialties. So I would love to hear your tips and suggestions. Leave them in the comments below, and then I will also post a link below to that podcast, which I thought had some really great tips specifically for people applying to ophthalmology. So that's before interviews even start and just getting things ready and getting things together. The next is getting to your interview, and so there's going to be travel involved. You might be tired, you might be rushing. There's all kinds of things that go into the travel for your interviews. When I was traveling for my fellowship interviews, I was taking red eyes, I was bouncing around from flight to flight. It was a mess. I was running through the airport over and over, and that was just the way it was. And so some tips I have for that are to, number 1, never check your bag. Always carry a carry-on, because you might not have time to get your checked bag. You don't know what's going to happen with your flights or if your flights will be delayed or canceled. So definitely make sure to have a carry-on bag with everything that you need. I was always wearing suits, and so I just watched a YouTube video on how to fold my suit so that it wouldn't wrinkle, and then I would hang it up in the bathroom when I took a hot shower and let the steam kind of steam it and get it a little bit fresh looking. When I was traveling for my fellowship interviews, I always used the travel as a time to prep for that particular interview. So I would read about the program, I would read about the different doctors at each program while I was on the flight or while I was in the airport. And that was a system that really worked well for me. You definitely don't have to do that, but I think it is good to make sure that you set aside a specific time where you know you're going to be reading about the program or looking into certain facts about each program. The night before your interview, you're checked into your hotel, you're all ready to go, you're ready for the interview day the next day. I think there are a few big things that you should do the night before your interview to definitely prepare. One is, as I was mentioning before, you want to prepare for your interview at that particular program. And so I think that it's imperative for you to read about each particular program you're interviewing and note a few specific things about that program that you like. That's going to make you really stand out in the interview if you're able to talk about specific facts about each program that you really are excited about. When a program director hears you mention that there's certain parts of the curriculum that you really love, or the fact that there's certain rotations, or there's a focus on international work, or whatever it is, in that particular program, it's going to show them that you care about the program, you've done research about that particular program, and it's going to show them that you actually are interested. Because remember, they want somebody who wants to be there just as much as you want to get accepted into their program. So whenever I was reading about programs, different things that I would note would be the size, whether or not there was international work or volunteer work, because that was something that was important to me when I was applying for residency interviews. When I was looking at fellowship interviews, I would want to see what type of research the different attendings were working on, or what different types of rotations or different types of hospitals I could expect to be at. You really want to try to get some of that basic information so it looks like you know a little bit about the program going into it. When you're reading about the program, it's also a great opportunity to come up with some questions that you can have prepared for your interviewer, because inevitably they're going to ask you if you have any questions for them. And I think that that's one of the hardest things, is to come up with questions to ask your interviewer, because you just don't know when you're going into residency or going into medical school, you don't know what to ask. And so I think when you're reading about programs, that is a great time to try to think of some questions you can ask. Maybe they have certain really interesting rotations, and you can ask them to tell you more about those particular rotations. Or they have different tracks, like a rural medicine track, or a community-based medicine track, or things like that. Just note anything interesting about the program and any questions you might have about it. All of these things that you're noting the night before are something that you want to write down on a piece of paper that you'll have with you on your day of the interview. And so I had a leather portfolio, and inside that portfolio I kept copies of my CV. I had a copy of my entire application so that I could go through it and make sure I knew everything in my application. And then I also had a notepad where I would write down notes about the program and the notes that I could take on the day of the interview. Besides the obvious thing about the night before the interview, like getting a great night's sleep and making sure your alarm is set and all of those kinds of things, you might also have some activities the night before, like a dinner or going out with some of the current residents. That's definitely something that happens when you're applying for residency and fellowship. You can expect to have a dinner the night before. I think it's very important to try to attend these dinners because it gives you a chance to meet the current residents or the current fellows and really get a feel for how they fit into the program, kind of what the general culture of the program is and how the residents are liking it. And also I think the residents are more likely to be candid with you when they're outside of the work setting. At the dinner, you can even ask the residents questions about the program. You can say, what kinds of things should I ask about tomorrow during my interview? And the residents will be happy to help you out. You can ask them what they love about the program. I think that's a really good thing to ask. You can ask them if there's anything they would change about the program or anything that they dislike about the program, and then ask them why they chose that program or why they ended up going to that particular residency or fellowship or even medical school if you have an event like that for medical students. Okay, so now we're at the day of your interview. You've made it. You are ready for your interview. So I'm going to start with what to wear. I think that this is a very important thing because what you wear, unfortunately, really immediately gives off a sense of who you are, and it's hard in an interview situation to not be judged by your cover or by your outer appearance. So this is your chance to look polished, to look professional, and honestly, you want to look unmemorable in a fashion sense. You want to look pretty bland and pretty normal, and that way they can get to know you for who you are in your CV, in your application, and they're not distracted by what you're wearing. So for gentlemen, I would recommend wearing a suit and tie, obviously, and then nice dress shoes, nice dress belt. There's all kinds of great blogs and even YouTube videos on the perfect dress for an interview, but I would say to wear just a normal looking suit. You don't want a flashy suit or a weird abnormal tie. Just look clean, sharp, professional, and guys have it so easy. It's just so not fair. And for ladies, you have two options. You can either wear a pantsuit or a skirt suit, and I think either one is perfectly appropriate. I think there's some very conservative, kind of older generation professionals who think that women in an interview situation should wear a skirt suit. So if you agree with that philosophy, then you can most certainly wear a skirt suit. If you do wear a skirt suit, then obviously you want to make sure your skirt is not too short. You want to test out the skirt by sitting down, and when you try it on, actually sit down and see how far it goes up your leg, because you don't want to feel uncomfortable about your skirt riding up when you sit down. And so try it on, feel comfortable in the skirt, but make sure that it is professional and it is not too high. Also, I think if you wear a skirt suit, it is appropriate to wear tights or pantyhose. I don't think this is a complete necessity, but I would just go on the safe side and wear either tights or pantyhose when you're wearing a skirt suit. I always wore pantsuits, and I generally prefer a pantsuit. I feel more comfortable in a pantsuit. It's just one less thing to worry about. I don't have to worry about pantyhose. I don't have to worry about my skirt being too high because I'm wearing a pair of pants. Also, pants have pockets, and you never know if you need to shove something in your pocket. So I generally would opt for a pantsuit, and I tended to wear a black pantsuit for all of my interviews, but I think that there's plenty of people who wear gray or khaki and look absolutely stunning. As for the shirt to go with your suit, I think any kind of plain blouse is absolutely acceptable. For all of my medical school interviews, I wore a collared button-down shirt. Even for my residency interviews, I mostly wore a collared button-down shirt. For my fellowship interviews, I wore a blouse that had like a bow tie here in the front, or a different, just kind of flowy blouse that either had a small collar or had kind of a higher neck. I think that in general, you want to steer clear of anything with a lower neck or any kind of showy neck. You want to have something that's high. Number one, it's going to make you feel a lot more comfortable because you don't have to worry about your blouse being down too low or anything like that, and it's just on the safer side. In terms of jewelry, I think it's perfectly appropriate to wear a necklace or even earrings, but I would just make sure that they're understated. Either pearls or a simple chain, and then studs or small hoops I think are totally fine for jewelry for your interview. Lastly, in terms of doing your hair, for both men and women, you just want your hair to be professional and look polished. I tended to pin my hair back in some way, either half up, half down, or I would pin back just a little piece, or I would wear a headband. And that was just to keep it off of my face, because if my hair is straight down in my face, then I tend to touch it and mess with it. And you don't want to be messing with your hair during an interview. You don't want to have to worry about it. So I would either somehow keep it back, or if you can wear it straight down and know that you won't touch it, then that's fine too. Just don't touch your hair. The last thing is the shoes that you wear on the day of your interview, and one thing I'd like to stress is make sure you wear comfortable shoes. For the vast majority of interviews, you're going to be walking around quite a bit, and you want comfortable shoes or shoes that you're able to walk in and keep up the pace, because sometimes you're walking really fast. I tended to wear small, maybe like 2-inch heels, and that worked well for me. Comfortable heels that I felt good walking around in. I had some kind of pointy toe pumps that I thought looked very nice and professional, but were still comfortable. And then I also had a little pair of like kitten heels that I enjoyed and felt like I could get around with pretty well in those too. In terms of a bag, I think you could carry a briefcase if you're a man, or a professional looking bag if you're a man, and then a professional looking purse if you're a woman as well. I have kind of a camel colored leather bag that I use as like a business or work kind of purse, and in that bag you can keep everything you need. So I have a portfolio that I talked about with everything, and I think that's important to have either some kind of folder or portfolio that you take with you on your interviews. You want to have lots of extra pens, maybe some like toothpicks, ibuprofen, Tylenol, that kind of stuff. If you're a girl, you can have some lip gloss, anything like that. I think it's totally appropriate to have mints or whatever in your bag and carry a bag with you. That's no problem. A lot of times at interviews, they're going to be giving you folders with information, and so it's totally fine to have a bag because you can put the folder and all that stuff right in your bag. On the day of your interview, you want to make sure you have breakfast unless they are going to be feeding you breakfast there. If they don't tell you that you're going to have breakfast, then I would just err on the side of making sure you have a little something at your hotel just so that you're not starving. You're going to be nervous, you're going to be feeling a little off anyways, and so you might as well have some good food in your stomach to kind of give you that energy, give you that mental focus to kind of get you through the morning. Give yourself plenty of time to get to the interview. You don't want to be running late. You don't want to be stressing about not finding the room that you're going to. So give yourself just ample amounts of time to get there. Being early is never a bad thing. Okay, and now comes the actual day of your interview. So I talked about this in the first interview video that I made, and I kind of briefly mentioned it earlier, but definitely prepare, not only just reading about the program that you're going to be interviewing, but also read about the people you know you'll be interviewing with. So sometimes you don't know who you're going to be interviewing with. When I was in medical school, I had no idea who would be interviewing me that day. But for residency, you can be assured that you will be interviewing with the program director and the department chair. Those are two people that you will definitely encounter during the day of your interview. And so you can read their bios, read their CV, see what their research interests are, things like that. It's really good to have a little bit of background knowledge about those people. And it's also good to know what they look like, so when they come up and they say hello, you know who they are, and you're not saying, oh, what's your name? And it's the department chair. You know, you want to know, like, oh, Dr. Patel, nice to meet you. And they'll be impressed that you know who they are, and that again shows that you're interested in the program and that you're really on top of your game. When it's time for your interviews to start, the first thing is that they will come into the room and you're going to want to shake their hand. And so I think that you can absolutely practice giving a good handshake, but you want to shake their hand firm and look them right in the eye. And so I always walk into the room and say, hi, I'm Andrea Tooley, and look them right in the eye, smile, shake their hand strongly, and then sit down. This is the first time that you have to give a really great impression, a strong, friendly, excited impression. So don't be weak or wimpy, give them a nice strong handshake and be energetic, be enthusiastic. You want to set the tone for the interview. You don't want to come in timid or quiet. You really want to be somebody that they're going to think, oh man, this is going to be good. I'm excited to talk to this person already. In terms of what they're going to ask you during your interview, there are a ton of incredible resources out there, and I feel as though I have zero qualifications to be telling you how to prepare for the questions that you get during your interview, except the fact that I've gone through it for medical school residency and fellowship. You should definitely practice some of those quintessential interview questions that you know you're going to get. Tell me about yourself. Why did you choose medicine? Why do you want to go into ophthalmology? Why do you want to go into your fellowship? Anything like that. You have to have those answers down. You have to know what you're going to say. You obviously don't want to sound too rehearsed and you don't want to sound robotic about it, but you want to have a well thought out, well prepared answer to that question that reflects who you are and that portrays what you want them to know about you. So practice the tell me about yourself, and know I have like a little short tell me about yourself, and then I have a long tell me about yourself. And so then you can kind of feel it out and decide which one you want to go with depending on the kind of mood of the interview. So you have the obvious questions like that, why medicine, why this program. Really important to know, why do you want to go to this program? What can you bring to this program? What would you be like as a resident? I think that you need to value yourself and you need to know what you're going to bring to a program and why they need you as their next resident or their next medical student. So don't be afraid to tell them what you're going to contribute and who you're going to be as a resident. What kind of student are you going to be? So besides all of those normal questions that you can Google and you can practice and you can write them down and you can know what you're going to say, there's all kinds of random questions that they can ask you. The easiest ones to start with are anything that you've mentioned on your CV. So anything you talk about in your personal statement, anything that someone may have mentioned in a letter of recommendation or your dean's letter, any research project you've ever done, any leadership activity you've ever been in, literally anything you can find on your entire application, you need to know about it and have something well thought out to say about it. And again, I've said some really helpful things, I think, in my first interview tip video. about kind of how to know how to say something about what's in your application. But whenever they ask you, oh, tell me about this one research project that you did, you have to immediately, you can't stop and think like, oh, that research project, let's see. Ooh, I don't quite remember. Oh, wait, yes, I do. You need to say, oh, this was a fantastic research project. It was actually my first project doing bench research, and I looked at perifornical hypothalamic orexinogenic neurons and blah, blah, blah. And you need to really be able to concisely say what you did, what you learned, and have something positive to say about each experience. I think really having something positive about everything they could potentially ask you about is really, again, going to set that positive tone about the interview. It's going to make them think about you in a favorable, positive way. And it just gives this kind of overall good impression of you as an applicant. Go through your application with a fine-tooth comb and make sure that you have something good to say about everything you've ever done. Or if there's something not so good, make sure you have something that you can say about what you learned or what went wrong or what you would have done differently. Or if there's anything negative, then you need to have something strong to say about it in terms of how it's helping you grow as a person. If there's anything negative in your personal statement or even on your application, like maybe you got a bad grade or had to repeat a class or maybe you got in trouble or anything like that, that's absolutely something you need to be well prepared to talk about in a mature and very professional way. And again, you just want to stress what you learned from it, how it's helped you become a better person, and how you're going to use that experience to be better in the future and to grow from it. And I think overall that shows that you're strong, it shows that you've worked through something difficult, and I think that it will reflect well and reflect positively on you as an applicant. There's all kinds of other interesting questions they can ask you, like what kind of movies do you like, what kind of music do you like. In one of my interviews, they asked me what kind of things I like to cook, and somebody asked me for a recipe. If you tell them that you like to sing, they might ask you to sing a song. Or if you tell them that you can do any kind of interesting thing, they might ask you to do it. So be prepared to showcase who you are. If you say you like to read, you better know a couple good books, and you better be ready to talk about a couple good books. If you say you like movies, you better know a bunch of good movies. Anything like that, you need to be able to back it up with actual information. And so go through everything about yourself, and I think a strong interviewer has specific details. When you say something very generalizable, like, oh, I like to be outdoors, then it's kind of like, meh, whatever. You're not going to remember anything. But if you say, oh, I really love trail running, and I actually just did this 50-mile race through the hills in Vermont, and it was awesome, and it was the first 50-miler I'd ever done, but I really hope I can do more, and Minnesota has some amazing trails, and so I think it'd be great to do my trail running here in Minnesota. Like, that was something very specific instead of just saying I like being outdoors. And it came back in a positive way, and it also showed something that you like about the location of their program or whatever. I hope you're understanding what I'm saying, that you just want specific details that are going to make them, again, remember you, remember specific things about you, and it continues to just add bulk and strength to your application as a whole. Lots of people are going to be doing these kind of behavioral type questions where they ask you situations and they ask you to give examples of how you would react or how you would respond in certain situations. And they're doing this because they want to see, are you a team player? Are you going to function well in a group? Are you going to cause a bunch of trouble in this residency program? They want to know how you think, how you act, and who you are, because studies have shown that no matter how good your application is and how good your CV is, it does not predict how well you are going to do as a resident. And so if you think about it from the program director's standpoint, it's hard for them to know, is this person going to be a good resident? And no matter how good your letters of recommendation are, they just can't hang their hat on that. So they really want to know who you are as a person. And that's why I think the more concrete details you can give them about who you are, the better. But they are going to ask you these behavioral type questions. So tell me about a time you had to make a very difficult decision. Or tell me about a time that you felt very proud. Or tell me about a time that there was a conflict that you had to help resolve. Or whatever. And these are all things that you can Google. There's huge lists of these behavioral type questions, and you need to prepare for these. Because if you don't have a good specific story and example, they're going to be disappointed. You really want to have a good story to give them about all of these different questions. And I found that you can kind of take maybe like 5 type stories of things that have happened in your life that kind of work for lots of different things. So like you kind of have like a negative story where something bad happened and then you made it better. And that could work for like dealing with a conflict, or a time that you failed, or a time that you struggled, or a time that you had to redo something. Like that one story could work for a few things. Or some like happy, successful story where you worked really hard and something good happened. That could be like where you showed leadership, or where you had a great success, or sometime when you were very proud. Like that story could work for several different types of questions as well. So you want to have these set stories that you already know, that you've already thought out, like, oh, I'm going to talk about, whatever. And so it's really important to have these worked out. I had one story where I don't know if I've mentioned this in a YouTube video recently, but I have my private pilot's license and I flew airplanes when I was in high school. And one time I was flying an airplane and I got lost. And I was going on a 3-legged flight, and so I was going to take off from one airport and go to another airport and land and refuel, go to another airport and land, and then come back to my home airport. And because of the weather, I ended up reversing the path. But when I did my flight plan, I didn't reverse it. So I started off flying this way, but my flight plan, I was still supposed to be going this way. And it took me maybe about 20 minutes to realize what I'd done. But in that time in between, I didn't know where I was. And I was disoriented and I was scared. And I was lost in an airplane flying around. And so I talk about kind of how I thought through it, kind of how I went back to the very beginning of my flight plan and I went step by step, and kind of what I did in order to get it back together, how I contacted the air control space to let them know that I was in a different place than what my flight plan said, and kind of step by step what I did. But that I was really scared and it was not a great experience. And so that was a good example for me that worked for like a time that something didn't work out the way that I planned, or a time that I was struggling, or like there's all kinds of, I can't think of specific questions that story would have worked for, but in general that story showed like how I focus under pressure and how I problem solve, and that story works for showing a residency program director like several different facets of my personality. And so that's just an example of one of these stories that I had a bunch. And so I would encourage you to come up with your own stories and have them show certain parts of your personality and show who you are, who you're going to be as a resident, because that's what your interviewer wants to know about you. During your interview, you're going to be nervous, and there's lots of great tips out there about how to help with your nerves. A lot of people will say to avoid drinking coffee, make sure you stay hydrated, get enough sleep. There's like all kinds of different techniques you can do, and I'll try to link some of those things below. I tend not to get as nervous. I'm a pretty conversational person, and so it's hard for me to give you great tips about what to do when you're nervous. But I would just encourage you to breathe, take a step back. It is okay to take a pause and think about a question before you dive into this big answer. What you want to do is you want to seem composed and thoughtful. And so it is completely acceptable to hear the question, take a step back for a second, think for a second, and then say, well, and then, go into your answer. It is completely fine to do that. And I think that if you're nervous, reminding yourself to slow down and really think about the question is going to be very helpful. And then I also think preparing for the interview is going to really help you if you're nervous, because you will know how you are going to say these things about yourself. And in an interview, just remember that there's going to be big things about you as a person that you want them to know. About me, I want them to know that I'm a hard worker and that I am a team player and I am there. I am all in. And if I am on your residency or if I'm on your fellowship team, then I am never going to let you down and I'm going to be your person. And so when I'm in my interview, I want to be saying things that are conveying that. And I also want them to know that I'm energetic, enthusiastic, I'm going to boost people up, like I'm going to be the one keeping us going. And so I also want to make sure that that's coming across during my interview. And so I think that if you have these things about yourself that you know that you want to convey, then during your interview, do these little check-ins and think like, have I shown them who I am? Have I shown them how dedicated I am to my research? Do they really understand how excited I am about my research project and how passionate I am about what I want to do in the lab and my big goals for being like an NIH-funded researcher in the long term? And so think about what you want them to know about you and make sure that during the interview, you tell them that, because this is your opportunity to tell them who you are. And just because they're asking all the questions doesn't mean that you can't interject some other things about yourself that you want them to know. As the interview's wrapping up, they're going to ask you if you have any questions. And this is the point where you have to have a question ready. And this is so hard. I always thought it was really hard to have a question. Like I mentioned before, it's just hard to know what you need to be asking because you're brand new at this. You've never been a resident before, or you've never been a medical student before. So how would you know what to ask? But I do think that that's something you can prepare for. You need to have a list of questions, and even during your interview, if something comes up, you can ask them a question, or you can like write down or make a little note of, oh, that's the question I'm going to ask them at the end of the interview. And you definitely want to have a question because, again, it will make you seem interested and invested in the program. If you say like, nope, I'm good, I don't have any questions, then it's just kind of like a womp womp, and it'll end your interview on just a lesser of a note. And so I encourage you to have a question. I encourage you to think of them beforehand because it's definitely hard to come up with one on the spot. Of course, there's some questions that you don't want to ask your interviewer, questions that are more appropriate to ask the current residents. And that would be questions about like vacation policies or the call schedule or lectures or whatever, because you don't want to seem lazy or that you're trying to get out of work or that you're already interested in how little you have to work or anything like that. I think it's definitely appropriate to ask about how do you teach surgery? What's the structure for teaching cataract surgery in this residency program? Or, I think it's totally fine to ask like what the didactic schedule is like, how much didactic type teaching is there, or ask about what research opportunities there are, what international health or volunteer type opportunities, all kinds of things like that. It really shows that you're interested in learning more about the program. And for those other questions, which are super important but something that you don't want to ask during your interview, you can always ask the residents or email them after if you still have questions like that. Once the interview is over, again, you want to thank your interviewer. You want to shake their hand once again, and say something positive. Say, thank you so much, really enjoyed speaking with you, and leave. I do think that it's very important to write thank you notes to your interviewers. They have taken time out of their busy clinical schedule to spend a day with you interviewing you. And so whether or not this is an email and thank you note or a handwritten thank you note is completely up to you. I think that culturally these days most people do email thank you notes. The benefit of those is that they get there faster, and then also it creates an open line of communication between you and your interviewer. If you write a handwritten thank you note, then they are not allowed to contact you back, but if you do email them, then they can respond with an email. Sometimes I would write an email thank you note to everyone, and then I would send a handwritten thank you note to the program director or a handwritten thank you note to the department chair. And maybe not to everyone that I interviewed with, but I would send email thank you notes to everyone. When you write your thank you notes, it's important to include something personal and to try to remember something that you guys spoke about during your interview. And so I think to help you with that, it's important to either take notes right after your interview, like, oh, we talked about da 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 da. And that way you can make your thank you notes more personal. There's some general interview etiquette and things that you should do and do not do during your interview day. So one thing, do not talk negatively about any other program or about any other applicant during your interview. Remember that you want to be professional, that you want to be positive, and you don't want anything negative kind of associated with you at all during your interview day. So just be positive, don't talk about other programs, don't talk about other applicants, and just enjoy yourself and focus on that day. Also, don't complain. Don't complain about the food, don't complain about anything. You want to seem like a very low maintenance, happy team player that is not going to be complaining or causing trouble. So even if it's gross food, don't complain about it and just try to kind of go with the flow. Make sure to thank the residents, the medical students, or the fellows who are interacting with you that day. They're helping you a lot and they absolutely can have a say in the acceptance process. If they experience anything negative with an applicant, then they can absolutely tell the program director what they experienced, and so don't write off any of the residents. Make sure that you're friendly and nice to them as well. When the day is over and you are done with your interview, then I think it's very helpful to take some notes because you will have been inundated with a ton of new information about a program and it is really hard to remember. So if you can, write down the call schedule or the lecture schedule or anything unique that you remember about the program. Take some notes on it, keep them for yourself. They will come in handy during your ranking process later. Whew, okay, so we have gone through a lot about interviews, preparing for them, what to wear, what to do the day of, how to prepare for interview questions, and there is so much more incredible information out there. And so I'm going to leave some links down in the description box below with some more interview information, but you guys out here have so much experience in terms of interviewing for medical school, residency, fellowship. Please leave your tips below for our little community here so that everyone can benefit from your experience. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Good luck and congratulations on all of your interviews if you are starting interview season now. Let me know, where are you interviewing? What are you interviewing for? I want to know. Please tell me. Don't forget to subscribe so that you don't miss a video anytime I make one, which is not always, but I'm trying to be better at them. So definitely subscribe and I will talk to you all later. Bye!